Hello, my name is Jeff Todd with Morvold Press, and today I was going to do a little bit of a tutorial on how to do elevation and depth. I've had a lot of people that have asked about how to accomplish a feeling of elevation and size within their maps, especially if they're doing like mountain ranges or cliffs or a variety of those kinds of things. So I thought it would be helpful to actually just show something I'm working on. I'll show you kind of the general workflow that I have for setting those kinds of things up, and that hopefully will give you an idea of how to do that internally within your own maps. So here, just to give you kind of a basic idea, I'm working on a addition to a canyon maze that I had created. This is going to be a bandit camp that is on the north end of that maze. I have some rocky cliffs that extend from that southern map, and then a kind of some rocky cliff here that I've already created. I haven't gotten everything done that I'm going to do here, so I'll show you some of that process. I've also defined a handful of little cliffs that I'm going to make here, as well as like a large canyon slash cliff that I'm going to make for the periphery of the bandit village that kind of lives in this space right here. Before we get into actually doing and working on this map, though, let me zoom in and I'll show you the core concepts around how to work with elevation. So the bulk of the elevation that I work with will be with the path tool. So if you go to your design tools or your tools on the left-hand side, it's going to be under this little flower, which is for terrain, water, material brush, and then path tool. So select path tool. There's a handful. The one that comes default that I use frequently with Dungeondraft is cliff path. So if I select that, you can select the width of your cliff, the smoothness of your cliff. So if I drag this from left to right, you can kind of see this is the top, this is the bottom of the cliff. If I change my width, obviously I'm going to get a bigger drawing. If I decrease it, obviously I can get a smaller one. So that just kind of helps with determining what size you want to use. And size will be important when we get to layering them to create the feeling and sense of depth. So there are effectively three things that you will do to create a sense of depth. And those are going to be to use the path tool and layer the path tool atop itself in slowly increasing sizes. So for example, if we let's start with a 1.5. So if I grab the path tool, and you can do this in your own version of Dungeondraft, go and grab the cliff path tool under the tools here, and then the path tool right here. Change your width if you want to 1.5. I would change my layer maybe to just layer 1. And then what we'll do is we'll just kind of make a little bit of a wave here, just so we can kind of see it move. Okay. So we're going to draw that across the screen. So then what I want to do is I've got my initial cliff here. I'm going to move this up, maybe by 0.5. So I'll move this up to 2. You can move it up in whatever increment you want. I'm just doing it in a fairly large size so you can see the difference. But then what I would do if I want to continue this wall and this feeling of height is I would take another cliff and I would sort of drag this kind of along the first one. I wouldn't put it right at the edge. Sometimes I get closer to the edge than others, and sometimes kind of cut back in. But now you kind of see we're starting to get this layered effect where I have cliff below and cliff above. Obviously, if you want to handle the ins and outs, you can use transition with fade and grow. Grow will make it slope, right? So it looks like it's sloping up. Fade is pretty self-explanatory. It will just kind of fade as you continue to draw. Okay. So those are two options you can to get it to blend in with other objects, or to ramp up so that if it starts from nothing and moves into the cliff, then you can do that. You can transition out in the same way. So if you want to have a grow and a shrink, maybe you had like a bridge of some sort and you want it to kind of come to a rise and then come back down, and then same going the other direction. I want it to go up and then come back down. So then we kind of have it leading out back onto ground level, but it goes obviously up in this way. So that's what grow and shrink and the fade are for. But we're not going to worry so much about that. In this case, we're just going to worry about the layering. So I did 1.5 on this layer. I did 2.5 on this layer. So now I'm going to, or 2, and I'm going to go to 2.5 now for the next one. And I'm going to set these back to none. So now I'll put another layer on top. Okay. I'm just kind of following the natural flow that I've made for the first cliff. So now we kind of get this this nice feel. And I'll go one more. I'll go to a 3.0. We'll have it go up to 3. So I'll have basically 4 layers high. All right, and I'll kind of layer that. Okay. So now that we have that, you can kind of start to feel the sense of depth that we're having. It looks kind of like a cliff-faced wall. To me, it's important that you don't draw them like this. Let me go back to something like this, and then I'm not drawing it like right at the edge, like this and like this. You can kind of tell that doesn't really have the same feel when they're layered over each other with a little bit of gap, or no gap, I should say. You have like the lip of this one is actually over maybe the top 10th of the front below it, is when you kind of create that more natural feel and that deeper feel. So that's why I don't layer them as close to the edge like that, is because you don't get the same feeling of depth. So that's step one. Step one is to layer your assets, and it's really step 1 and 2. Step 2 is forced perspective. Okay, and what forced perspective, I'll show you what that means to some degree. I've already done it, and I'll explain how I did that. But let me go and grab an object. I'm just going to grab a tree, and kind of use that as a way to show you what I mean. So here we'll grab a tree. So let's say that this is a tree that's on the ground floor, like that's at the bottom of this cliff, right? So maybe the tree's down here, and I'll make a handful of trees, right? Maybe the tree's down here. I don't want to get too much bigger than 0.56. Let's say that's my big tree. Okay, so we'll put a handful down here. And some smaller ones, okay? So now we've got some trees kind of at the bottom of this cliff. Well, if I want to make it seem like it's this higher up here, then one trick I can use is I can increase the size of the same assets up here. Okay. So at the top of my cliff, so to speak, all of my trees are much larger than the trees down here. Now they're just, they just look a little, there's nothing different between these trees and these trees other than I've just made them larger. And the other thing that I did was each of these paths, each of these 4 paths that I made for the cliff tool is successively bigger and bigger, right? So 1.5 to 2.53. So that also helps with creating that sense of depth. So let me move some of these trees off the line so I can show you the next step. So the next step then is shading, and that can make a huge difference as well. So what you would want to do here is it's another path tool. The one that comes by default in Dungeondraft is this one, which is called Shadow. So you would basically want to put this maybe below water. So you just want to make it below your cliff line. And then you would just start, I kind of put it on right on the line. Now I have to adjust, where it is. I'm gonna start at 1 and see if that's too much. But I put it down. Okay, that's not quite enough for me. Now I use a third-party tool from a creator called Gnome Factory. So I'm gonna go down to that because I just like it better. It's designed to make hills, but I actually like it as a shadow. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that underneath instead. And we'll just make this slightly bigger, 1.1. All right, so then I follow the line. I'm like, okay, that's gonna be way too big. I overestimated it. Let's go down to 0.8. So now I'm following the edge of my cliff, okay? And I'm kind of actually cheating in just a little bit. And I'm just clicking as I follow it along. Okay. Now, with this specific shadow, one direction is light and the other direction is a little heavier. I'm going to undo this, and I'm actually going to start on the other end. And it was looking a little big to me still. So I'm going to take it down another 0.10 to 0.7. So now I'm going to move this direction. I'm, again, just following the cliff, the kind of natural curve of the cliff, and I'm just clicking my mouse button as I go, putting down this shadow. Okay. So we get to the edge, and then we'll hold it. So now we have this shadow that comes down at the base of the cliff, and that looks even more like a sense of depth that you're getting from this layered effect, as well as the shading at the bottom, as well as the forced perspective of the objects on the bottom, objects at the top. You can't tell so much because it's not really presented to you very well. Obviously, if we were doing the rest of this map, it would be more apparent how that would work. But I can maybe do one of these, little cliffs and kind of show you how that works. But this is the general idea. We layer the multiple path tools. We have successive sizes. So we go from the 1.5 to 2, 2.5 to 3. As we move up, We use shading at the bottom. Another trick you can use is to come in and grab like some rocks. And for the rocks, I'll just grab a couple rocks here, and I'm going to change this layer to underground. What that's going to do is it's going to put it both underneath my cliff, which are all layer 1, as well as underneath the shadow at layer 2. And that means that it's going to these rocks are going to kind of poke out from underneath the cliff itself. Okay. And that also gives it kind of a sense of depth. It almost looks like it's resting on some of these rocks. So this almost turns into a 5th layer, if you will, of rocks at the bottom. And you can kind of use these if you want to create, you know, little cave entrances or little pockets. For example, if we wanted to make this, let me move this. If we wanted to make this like a little cave entrance, right? I could add another stone or something like that. Make it a little bit bigger. Add another stone here, and then go back to my pathing tool with the shadow. I've already got it selected, and so now I also want to go below ground. So it's going to be underneath everything. And then I'm basically just going to kind of like sweep across the front. Okay. And I'm going to sweep across the front. It's going beneath the rocks. It's going beneath the cliffs. So now, just by putting that additional shadow in there, now I've got a nice little, kind of cavern entrance that looks like it's going into and underneath this whole set of cliffs. So this is these are multiple tricks that you can use to lend a sense of depth to your cliff face, to your mountain, to any kind of structured wall that you've created that you want to have that sense of depth and create the sort of 3-dimensional feel in your maps, which is really nice and helpful. So those are the general steps that I would follow. So let me do those on one of these areas that I've already defined. So again, this is a map I'm working on. There's a whole maze of these kind of rocks down below to the south, so that they would empty out into this next map. And then my intention is for this next map to have sort of a little raider settlement, if you will, here. I might have some water, like a little reservoir or lake or something like that they use for themselves. I made a little side entrance or something like that I'll probably put some shrubs or whatnot around to cover as a secondary entrance if they want to scout it out. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to I'll do 2 things. First, I'm going to do the perimeter of this and show you kind of that layering effect. And then what I'll also do is take one of these little smaller cliffs and I'll show you how I would dress that and layer that up. So let's do the outside one. What I'm going to do for that, again, I'm going to go to my my toolbar. I'm going to click on the little flower. I'm going to go down and select Path Tool. Now I have a third-party package from Ascendi, and I am going to go ahead and use that one. I've already put down a 1.5, so I'm going to move up to 2. So I slide my width up to 2. And I'm going to start off screen here just a little bit. Now I'm going to move this back up to, say, layer 1 and above. That way it will go over the previous layer. Well, looks like a previous layer was something higher, so let me move that. Actually, let's check what it is so I don't have to guess. So I'm going to go down to my select tool. I'm going to select, you can select the entire path. So I see that I'm on layer 4. I'm going to move that down to layer 1. Then I'm going to go back to my path tool. All right, and now it should be over. And you can zoom in if you want so I can kind of see. So now, as you can see, I'm kind of dragging this over the top, 10, 15% of the previous one to kind of make it look like it's more sheer of a drop. Maybe even like 25% in places. I might have it come in and out because cliff faces do that, right? They've got places where it bulges out. They've got places where it cuts back. So I think it's natural to have that kind of feel. And so I follow just the natural curve that I've already defined for this cliff. And we'll work our way around. You can go pretty quick. I'm going a little slower than I normally would. Winding around here. Just want to be careful not to misclick since you'd have to redo it all. You can change the edits, and I'll show that in a moment. Okay, so then we finish that one. You can click edit points if you want to and go into any of your paths and move it around. So if you felt like you went too far, too slow, late, you can move it forward, you can move it backward, you can move it where you had it. That's you can fix your mistakes. So don't worry too much about that. Let's do another one. So let's go ahead and go, we'll stay in the same layer. Let's just go up to 2.5 and we'll do the same thing. We're going to zoom in. All right, now we're just taking this a slightly larger version of the rock. Again, I'm keeping kind of over the top quarter, or maybe even half in some places of it, because I want it to have that sheer feel to the edge of the cliff. Now, if I wanted there to be paths going up this onto another level, I would have had to plan that out already. I am not intending for that to happen, so I didn't worry about it. So we'll make our way around the periphery, doing the same thing, just kind of layering this on top. And you can kind of already see it's starting to have, kind of a feeling of depth to it, especially next to one that does not have that same thing done to it. And round that out. Okay. So now we have one that's starting to look a little bit more like, a raised cliff. Obviously, I have to worry about the top of this in terms of what I want to do. But it's starting to come along and then it looks good. I'm going to do this one, all the way around. I'm going to finish it up just so you can kind of see a finished one. Actually, I'll do maybe 2 of these and show you 2 different ways to do it. So the first way is we'll just continue as we have. Now, I think I did all of these at 4, so I'm going to have to move this down to 1. I'll move this one also down to 1. Go back to my path tool, and now we'll just start layering. Oh, I'm way too high. I want to be back at 2.0. There we go. Since this is just the second layer. All right, so now we just kind of make our way around it. You don't have to be super precise. You just want it to kind of have the look you want. As long as it does, then you're pretty good. Okay, so now I want to go to 2.5. And we'll go around it again. Now for this one, after I finish the 2.5, I think I'm going to be done. Okay, so that's as high as I want this one to go. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Path Tool. I'm going to go down to my shadow. You would just go up to the top and use the default shadow right here. But I'm going to use the shadow that I like better. And I am going to change that back to maybe 0.75. Okay, I'm going to change that to below water. And now I'm just going to, and that's still a little too big. Let's go down to 0.6. I think that's what we had the other one was. Okay, and now I'm going to go along the base like so. We're just adding the shading. Okay, we're adding the shadow around the base of the cliff until we get to the end, and there you go. You can make it, if you want it to be much darker, you can, one easy way to do that is you can just get here, you can find it, highlight it, paste it, and then just move it over itself. Right? You might take you a little bit. Like I like to highlight this one and say, okay, I'm pretty close to it. So if I just come down to here, I'm almost there. Okay. So if you wanted to, you could make it much darker. I think that's a little too dark, so I'm just going to remove that and just keep that right there. So that looks good to me. So now on the top, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some rocks from that same pack that I got that wall from, which is from Ascendi. And his package looks like, let's scroll down to it here. Looks like this. It's actually, I think, a reef one, but it's got these same colored rocks as the stone. So now I'm going to change this to a higher layer, like 3. And I'm going to size these things to kind of just fill in the gaps, right? This shape kind of fits into this shape. So I'm just going to stick that there. I'm going to grab another one and just kind of slot it in. I'm going to find another one that's maybe, kind of on the bigger side. Something like this. No, yeah, something like that. And just kind of find a spot that where the shape looks right. Maybe something like this. Looked better. Okay. And we'll add in some more, maybe one more rock or 2 more. Let's get some slightly larger ones, kind of in the middle. We'll little guy. Have him hanging out over here. I'll have him over here. And there, that looks good. Okay, so now I've got some rocks kind of on top of the mountain, if you will, the hill. I will then maybe go to my terrain layer. I'm going to get a little bit of sand and just kind of, I'm lightly tapping my mouse so that it starts to fill in just a little bit. You can adjust how much it fills in with this intensity. So what I did is it's under the same plant, little plant icon. There's terrain is the first one, path is the one we've been using, but I use terrain. I'm using terrain sandstone and sand. If I use terrain sandstone, if I change the intensity back to say like 1.8, as I do that, it's going to more slowly add the given terrain, mixing it with the other terrain. So I kind of want it to be mostly sandstone, just with a little bit of sand up there. And then I want to grab this gravel terrain, which is some rocks. And I'm going to kind of just like dot this. I'm clicking on it, and it takes me a little longer to click on it when I've got it at that 1.8, but it also makes it so it doesn't just plaster it down. I'll show you what it does. If I just switch this all the way to 8, if I go here and like touch a mouse, like hold my mouse down for a second, you'll see it just instantly kind of fills the space. If I move it down to 1 and I just hold my mouse down, you'll see it takes a lot longer of a time. It's not even coming in, like you don't even see it yet, and it's not going to. So I'm going to move this back up to say like 2, which is definitely usable. So I'll just kind of be clicking. I'm adding a little bit of the rock just so it looks, kind of stony up here. Okay. So that looks good. And then I may do the same thing down at the bottom. I might just add a little bit of rock kind of around the base. Now I'm going to do a lot more to it once I'm done, but just so you can kind of get a sense of how it looks. You can hold the mouse down if you're careful about how long you linger in any one area so it doesn't like plaster it all over the place. Started doing that at the last second. You can always just grab your previous one and kind of thin it out a little bit. Okay, so now you can kind of see just with those handful of steps, I've got something that started just like this, with no shading, no layering, nothing on top, no terrain changes, none of that, to something like this. Now I'm going to go one step further here. I'm going to go ahead and put like some little bushes underneath it. So I'm going to go up to another third-party app pack that I have because I really liked kind of like this grass that he had. Let me see if I can, there we go. I liked this grass for kind of being underneath. So I'm going to go to below ground because I want it to be underneath the shading. I also like this because it adds a little pop of green into an otherwise very red map. And I'm just going to start layering this like underneath. Okay. Maybe sometimes you can barely see it. Maybe sometimes it comes out quite a bit. Right. Just in little areas. All right. I'm just going to work our way around. Okay. So, now we've got a little bit of depth. If we want to add something a little bit more, what I did with the other one is I grabbed like one of these thorns and just kind of increase the size. And then I just kind of go around the base and just kind of stick that in, and that kind of gives me just an additional element, right, to the base of this. Maybe there's these bushes, but these bushes have a lot of thorns and brambles going around it, which could be something I want maybe the players have to deal with. Maybe there's a cave, or maybe they have to climb it, or whatnot. And it's just an added element that you can add in there. And since the previous map had it, I'm going to put it there as well. So that is kind of my finished little hill that I think has a fairly good sense of depth around it. It's got kind of my top, which is handy because I can turn the grid on, and now if people wanted to climb it, they could. And they could be up here, and they could like hide behind this rock, and they could watch the entrance. They could do a bunch of things from elevation. You could think of each layer being maybe like 10 feet. So maybe if we were doing this, that'd be 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. And then they're, basically 30 feet high off the ground, or 40 feet, whatever you want to rule for that. There's a variety of things you can do, but you can kind of see the difference between one that I just identified the border of the hill, and then one that is actually pretty much finished. So I'm going to keep this one short. I just wanted to give you guys kind of a working example of how you can use the different assets in the paths, the shading, the forced perspective to create that sense of depth on your maps. And I hope that's very helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you want to watch more videos, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.